Thanks for checking out this horror debate series video. So, we already covered the best new horror movie trend. Now it's time to cover the worst. And for my pick, it's actually something that applies to kind of all film at the moment, but it obviously also applies to horror, so I'm choosing it for this debate. It's not just specific to horror, but it's something that really does bother me. Also, it's part of a bigger problem that I'm going to kind of like take down to an even smaller term, I guess, if you will. You'll see what I'm saying. But first, if you don't know how this works, and you're like, what is this horror debate series thing? Watch my video, get my pick and all my justifications for my pick, then go to Your Friendly Neighborhood Uncle Pete's channel, which is linked in my description. Watch his video doing another one of these, another worst. Then you can come back to my channel if you want. You don't have to. Go to the community tab and you can vote for who you think had the best argument. Not necessarily the best pick, but the best argument. There was also an option for calling it a tie because, some people just can't make up their mind, and that's totally fine. That just means that both of us are doing a great job. So, anyway, let me get to my pick for the worst new horror movie trend. Stretching runtime. So this is actually just a subsection of a larger problem, which is movies being too long. But I'm going to call it stretching runtime because that's a more egregious thing. Because movies just being too long is just, sometimes a movie is, over 2 hours, but it's actually engaging and you do need that much time to tell a good, effective story. Stretching runtime is more the situation where you can tell that there isn't enough story for whatever the runtime is. Because there is this archaic thing where people are still stuck in that mindset where it's like, a feature-length movie has got to be about an hour and a half long, and it's even better if it's longer. Au contraire. So I'm going to go through each one of my points. First point, momentum is hard to gain and maintain. That's just something with film in general. Getting people engaged, keeping them engaged, gaining interest with your audience, making them immerse themselves in the world you're trying to create and the story that you're trying to tell. It's a hard thing to do. Now, when you're adding padding to a film and you're padding out the runtime, you have a tendency to kind of lose that momentum. It really causes a lot more sections of the film that work against all that momentum building or against maintaining whatever momentum you would have already started with. Typically, when I have these films that I would say are feeling like they're stretched for runtime, it's usually a situation where they start pretty strong, they're pretty interesting, or you understand from the get-go, okay, it's going to be a little bit slower because we need to establish where we are with the story, we need to establish characters, who they are, what they're up to, what their past is, all that stuff. So you give them a little bit of a pass, or it's just straight up very interesting. So then, eventually, as the film goes on, it starts to kind of peter out, and you start to see these sections where you're like, this film stretched for runtime. So the momentum thing's a big thing. It kind of rolls into my next point, which is pacing. Pacing can become very poor and encourage people to reach for their phones. That is something sometimes people do just no matter what. But there are people who will legitimately pay attention to movies and shows that if it's starting to lose their interest, it's starting to not be as interesting, and, people's attention spans have become a lot smaller for that type of stuff. They will legitimately reach for their phone and you have lost them. Now, I know there are a lot of people who are like, I can be on my phone and pay attention to a film at the same time. That's not a thing. Multitasking like that, it's not a thing. You're dividing your attention. Therefore, you're not fully paying attention to one of those things. You may get a thing here or there, but you're losing yourself to one of those things that you're multitasking on. And when it's a film, you're going to miss potentially some of the good stuff. You're going to miss some jokes if there's comedy to it, stuff like that. So it's very important for filmmakers to kind of make the film as tight as possible, because in this day and age, you can lose people to their phones. And then if you have, a lull in it where you've just added a bunch of padding into the film, that might be the moment you lose them. And then you have something really good after that, but they're not going to hear that, or they're not going to see that, or they're not going to feel what you're trying to create in that scene because you've already lost them. Their attention's not fully on your film. So that's another aspect of this. My next point, just because you have a good short film doesn't mean it should be stretched to feature length, especially if you're mainly adding filler. I've seen this a lot within horror films, especially horror films that are either exclusives or original to Shudder recently, because I review all of those. These films where you find out, oh, this was a, short story, or it was a short film, and people said, oh, that's really good, it works really well, just off the top of my head, Skinamarink being one of them. And people were like, that would be great, you should do a feature length based off this. That's fine if you can fill everything out. Like if you can fill in richer story for the characters, more character development, more actual story to the story, as opposed to these films that you can see oftentimes just do longer takes. Do a lot of longer takes, put in a little bit of extra stuff over here, a little extra stuff over here, relating to characters or relating to the story somewhat, but it doesn't really matter that much. People can feel that. People get bored with that. It's not meaningful content to the film, and at that point, you're just better off leaving it a short film. Whether it was one that you actually filmed as a short film from the get-go, or if it was scripted for that, it was a short story. Short film is film, and that's legitimate, and you can just put that out. All right, my next point. In the era of streaming, standards on runtime should be completely arbitrary. That's something I kind of alluded to before about people having in their minds, it's a feature-length film, it's got to be about an hour and a half, or it's even better if it's longer. With streaming, it doesn't really matter. And that's why when I see shorter films, and I know it's been a while since I've referenced this, but I have referenced this on my channel quite a few times. The film Host that was on Shudder, it was a big hit. Good film. It was under an hour. And why was it effective at under an hour? Because it kept moving. The pacing was great for it. People could tell there really wasn't any filler to the film. It was just pure entertainment for less than an hour. And no one watched that film and said, man, I needed a lot more than that. Because they told the story in whatever time they needed. And it felt like you got the complete story. So you can do that. Edit the script down. That's the way it should be. Next point. If you make a film that's just okay, people are more likely to be fine with spending their time watching it versus if it's longer, if it's shorter versus being longer. There are legitimately times where people will be like, hey, you can tell there's a lot of filler in this film, or it's not that great of a film. And people hearing that from them will be like, well, it's only about an hour, or it's a little bit over an hour, or it's a little bit under an hour and a half. I'll just give it a shot, because if there are a few good things in there, a few things that entertain me or intrigue me, that's fine. I'm totally fine spending that time. Now, if you start getting into a situation where it's a film that's like 2 hours and people are hearing that about it, people are like, yeah, that's a much bigger time commitment, and I'm not doing it because there are a lot other films I could watch with that time. I know people keep saying that, like, film is an experience, and however long you need to take to tell a story is how long you need. Sure, that is a thing, but on the other hand, people have a lot going on, and there are a lot of films that people can be watching. So if people are trying to figure out what film do I watch right now, there are plenty of times, and I've done this before, where I'm trying to figure out what film to watch, and I'm looking at the runtime, and I'm like, I don't feel like I have time for 2 hours right now, or I don't want to commit 2 hours right now because I want to move on to something else after watching the movie. So if it's under an hour and a half, big thumbs up on that one. And I'm more willing to take a chance on a shorter film than I am on a longer film. So that's another big thing with this. And then the last point I want to make on this topic is you're wasting the viewer's time, and that is just disrespectful. If you are legitimately just trying to stretch a film, just to stretch a film, like I said, you're adding in extra stuff that's kind of tied into the story, but it doesn't really matter that much, or you're just putting in longer takes of scenes just to pad that time out, shame on you. Because people are spending their time watching it, and if you know that it's filler, people watching it are going to know that it's filler, and that's just disrespectful. It's disrespectful to your audience. And at the end of the day, you want to put out the best content possible. So there you have it. So that is why my choice for the worst horror movie trend is stretching runtime. Not a fan of. I know it's kind of weird because throughout this, it's kind of sounded like I was legitimately talking to filmmakers doing this video. I didn't plan to do that. It just kind of morphed into that. So apologies if you didn't like that. Hopefully it was okay. But regardless, this is where I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think is the worst trend. Also, your thoughts on, what I laid out here. And you can do the same for Uncle Pete as well on his video. And if you guys have comments that kind of overlap, you can, copy and paste from one of our channels to the other. It's totally fine. We're good with that because we don't necessarily go over and read each other's. But yeah, go ahead and put your comments down there. Do us both a favor. Subscribe to both our channels if you haven't already. Although at this point, if you're watching this and you've seen any other of my videos, you should have already subscribed because it means you'll like me enough to give me at least 2 chances. Same with Uncle Pete. Also, hit the notification bell button for both our channels because then you'll know when we're putting up new videos. I'm doing 3 a week. He is doing 2 a week. He is putting even more work probably into his 2 videos than I am in my 3 videos a week, just because he does a lot of editing and stuff. I don't really edit much. It's just kind of like raw. That's just how I do it. But regardless, thank you everyone for being involved with this. Thank you for checking this out. And until next time, keep it brutal.